This financial crisis, which could never happen today, was simply the latest in a series of murderous 20th century catastrophes which had originated entirely in human brains. From the violence people were doing to themselves and each other, and to all other living things for that matter. A visitor from another planet might have assumed that the environment had gone haywire and that the people were in such a frenzy because nature was about to kill them all. But the planet a million years ago was as moist and nourishing as it is today, and unique in that respect in the entire Milky Way. All that had changed was people's opinion of the place. To the credit of humanity as it used to be, more and more people were saying that their brains were irresponsible, unreliable, hideously dangerous, wholly unrealistic, were simply no damn good. In the microcosm of the Hotel El Dorado, for example, the widow Mary Hepburn, who had been taking all her meals in her room, was cursing her own brain sotto voce for the advice it was giving her, which was to commit suicide. "You are my enemy," she whispered. "Why would I want to carry such a terrible enemy inside of me?" She had been a biology teacher in the public high school in Ilium, New York, now defunct, for a quarter of a century, and so was familiar with the very odd tale of the evolution of a then extinct creature named by human beings the Irish elk. "Given a choice between a brain like you and the antlers of an Irish elk," she told her own central nervous system, "I'd take the antlers of the Irish elk." These animals used to have antlers the size of ballroom chandeliers. They were fascinating examples, she used to tell her students, of how tolerant nature could be of clearly ridiculous mistakes in evolution. Irish elk survived for 2.5 million years, in spite of the fact that their antlers were too unwieldy for fighting or self-defense and kept them from seeking food in thick forests and heavy brush. I have to Google that as soon as I get off this reading. Mary had also taught that the human brain was the most admirable survival device yet produced by evolution. But now her own big brain was urging her to take the polyethylene garment bag from around a red evening dress in her closet there in Guayaquil and to wrap it around her head, thus depriving her cells of oxygen. What a great fucking book. Before that, her wonderful brain had entrusted a thief at the airport with a suitcase containing all her toilet articles and clothes, which would have been suitable for the hotel. That had been her carry-on luggage on a flight from Quito to Guayaquil. At least she still had the contents of the suitcase she had checked through rather than carried, which included the evening dress in the closet, which was for parties on the Bahia de Darwin. She was also still in possession of a wetsuit and flippers and mask for diving, 2 bathing suits, a pair of rugged hiking boots, and a set of war-surplus United States Marine Corps combat fatigues for trips ashore, which she was wearing now. As for the pantsuit she had worn on the flight from Quito, her big brain had persuaded her to send it to the hotel laundry. To believe the sad-eyed hotel manager when he said she could surely have it back by morning in time for breakfast. But much to the embarrassment of the manager, that too had disappeared. But the worst thing her brain had done to her, other than recommending suicide, was to insist that she come to Guayaquil despite all the news about the planetary financial crisis, despite the near certainty that, quote, the nature cruise of the century, end of quote, booked to capacity only a month before, would be called off for want of passengers. Her colossal thinking machine could be so petty, too. It would not let her go downstairs in her combat fatigues on the grounds that everybody, even though there was practically nobody in the hotel, would find her comical in such a costume. Her brain told her, they'll laugh at you behind your back and think you're crazy and pitiful. And your life is over anyway. You've lost your husband and your teaching job, and you don't have any children or anything else to live for. So just put yourself out of your misery with a garment bag. What could be easier? What could be more painless? What could make more sense? To give her brain its due, it was entirely its fault that 1986 really had been a perfectly awful year so far. The year had started out so promisingly, too, with Mary's husband, Roy, in seemingly perfect health and secure in his job as a millwright at GEFFCO, the principal industry in Ilium, and with the Kiwanis giving her a banquet and a plaque celebrating her 25 years of distinguished teaching, and the students naming her the most popular teacher for the 12th year in a row. At the start of '86, she said, "Oh, Roy, we have so much to be thankful for. We're so lucky compared to most people. I could cry for happiness." And he said, putting his arms around her, "Well, now, you just go ahead and cry." She was 51 and he was 59. And they were great lovers of the out-of-doors, hiking and skiing, and mountain climbing and canoeing and running and bicycling and swimming. So they both had lean and youthful bodies. They did not smoke or drink, and they ate mostly fresh fruits and vegetables, with a little fish from time to time. They had also handled their money well, giving their savings in financial terms the same sort of sensible nourishment and exercise that they gave themselves. The tale of fiscal wisdom which Mary could tell about herself and Roy, of course, would be a thrill to James Waite. And, yes, Waite, that eviscerator of widows, was speculating about Mary Hepburn as he sat in the bar of the El Dorado, although he had not met her yet, nor learned for certain how well fixed she was. He had seen her name on the hotel register and had asked the young manager about her. Waite liked what little the manager was able to tell him, this shy and lonesome schoolteacher upstairs, although younger than any of the wives he had ruined so far, sounded to him like his natural prey. He would stalk her at leisure during the nature cruise of the century. If I may insert a personal note at this point, when I was alive, I often received advice from my own big brain, which, in terms of my own survival, or the survival of the human race for that matter, can be charitably described as questionable. Example: it had me join the United States Marines and go fight in Vietnam. Thanks a lot, big brain. I haven't read this book in, I think exactly 10 years, and I only read it once before, and I remember thinking, man, this is the best. And it's so far, we're only 30 pages in, and it's just fucking fantastic. On we go. The national currencies of all 6 guests at the El Dorado, the 4 Americans, one claiming to be a Canadian, and the 2 Japanese, were still as good as gold everywhere on the planet. Again, the value of their money was imaginary. Like the nature of the universe itself, the desirability of their American dollars and yen was all in people's heads. And if Waite, who did not even know that there was a financial crisis going on, had carried out his masquerade as a Canadian to the extent of bringing Canadian dollars into Ecuador, he would not have been as well received as he was. Although Canada had not gone bankrupt, people's imaginations in more and more places, including Canada itself, were making them unhappy about trading anything really useful for Canadian dollars anymore. A similar decay in imagined value was happening to the British pound and the French and Swiss francs and the West German mark. The Ecuadorian sucre, meanwhile, named in honor of Antonio José de Sucre, 1795 to 1830, the national hero, had come to be worth less than a banana peel. Up in her room, Mary Hepburn was wondering if she had a brain tumor, and that was why her brain was giving her the worst possible advice all the time. It was a natural thing for her to suspect, since it was a brain tumor which had killed her husband Roy only 3 months before. It hadn't been enough for the tumor to kill him either. It had to addle his memory and destroy his judgment first. She had to wonder, too, when his tumor had begun to do that to him, whether it wasn't the tumor which had made him sign them up for, quote, the nature cruise of the century, end of quote, in the promising January of that ultimately horrible year. Here was how she found out he had signed them up for the cruise. She came home from work one afternoon expecting Roy still to be at GEFFCO. He got off work an hour later than she did. But there Roy was, already home. And it turned out that he had quit at noon. This was a man who adored the work he did with machinery and who had never taken off so much as an hour from his job during his 29 years with GEFFCO. Not for sickness, since he was never sick. Not for anything. She asked him if he was sick, and he said that he had never felt better in his life. He was proud of himself in what seemed to Mary the manner of an adolescent who was tired of being thought a good boy all the time. This was a man whose words were few and well chosen, never silly or immature. But now he said incredibly, and with an inane expression to match, as though she were his disapproving mother, I played hooky. It had to have been the tumor that said that, Mary now thought in Guayaquil. And the tumor couldn't have picked a worse day for carefree truancy, for there had been an ice storm the night before, and then wind-driven sleet all day. But Roy had gone up and down Clinton Street, the main street of Ilium, stopping in store after store and telling the salespeople that he was playing hooky. So Mary tried to be happy about that, to say and mean that it was time he loosened up and had some fun. Although they had always had a lot of fun on weekends and during vacations and at work as far as that went, but a miasma overlay this unexpected escapade, and Roy himself, during their early supper, seemed puzzled by the afternoon. So that was that. He didn't think he would do it again, and they could forget the incident, except maybe to laugh about it now and then. But then, right before bedtime, while they were staring at the glowing embers in the fieldstone fireplace, which Roy had built with his own 2 horny hands, Roy said, There's more. There's more of what? Said Mary. About this afternoon, he said. One of the places I went was the travel agency. There was only one such establishment in Ilium and not doing well. So, she said. I signed us up for something, he said. It was as though he were remembering a dream. It's all paid for. It's all taken care of. It's done. In November, you and I are flying to Ecuador. And we are going to take the nature cruise of the century. Roy and Mary Hepburn were the very first persons to respond to the advertising and publicity program for the maiden voyage of the Bahia de Darwin, which ship was nothing but a keel and a pile of blueprints in Malmo, Sweden at the time. The Ilium travel agent had just received a poster announcing the cruise. He was just scotch taping it to his wall when Roy Hepburn walked in. If I may interject a personal note, I myself had been working as a welder in Malmo for about a year, but the Bahia de Darwin had not yet materialized sufficiently so as to require my services. I would literally lose my head to that steel maiden only when springtime came. Question: who hasn't lost his or her head in the springtime? But to continue. The travel poster in Ilium depicted a very strange bird standing on the edge of a volcanic island, looking out at a beautiful white motor ship churning by. This bird was black and appeared to be the size of a large duck, but it had a neck as long and supple as a snake. The queerest thing about it, though, was that it seemed to have no wings, which was almost the truth. This sort of bird was endemic to the Galapagos Islands, meaning that it was found there and nowhere else on the planet. Its wings were tiny and folded flat against its body, in order that it might swim as fast and deep as a fish could. This was a much better way to catch fish than, as so many fish-eating birds were required to do, to wait for fish to come to the surface and then crash down on them with beaks agape. This very successful bird was called by human beings a flightless cormorant. It could go where the fish were. It didn't have to wait for fish to make a fatal error. It didn't have to wait for fish to make a fatal error. What a masterpiece. Somewhere along the line of evolution, the ancestors of such a bird must have begun to doubt the value of their wings. Just as in 1986, human beings were beginning to question seriously the desirability of big brains. If Darwin was right about the law of natural selection, cormorants with small wings just shoving off from shore like fishing boats must have caught more fish than the greatest of their aviators. So they mated with each other, and those children of theirs who had the smallest wings became even better fisher people, and so on. Now, the very same sort of thing has happened to people, but not with respect to their wings, of course, since they never had wings, but with respect to their hands and brains instead. And people don't have to wait anymore for fish to nibble on baited hooks or blunder into nets or whatever. A person who wants a fish nowadays just goes after one like a shark in the deep blue sea. It's so easy now.